The last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. As Imran Khan's long march approaches Islamabad, and with Imran Khan himself steadily ramping up the tension and the rhetoric, we ask today, how serious a challenge does Imran Khan pose to the Pakistan army, and how is the army likely to respond? Joining me live from the American capital, Washington, D.C., is possibly the greatest scholar on the Pakistan army, the first director of the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., and the author of seminal books on the Pakistan Army, The Battle for Pakistan, and Cross Swords, Pakistan, Its Army, and the Wars Within, Shuja Nawaz. Shuja Nawaz, let's start with the challenge Imran Khan poses to the army chief, the ISI, and in fact to the army as an institution which traditionally ultimately determines what happens in Pakistan. Now, as you know, the army in Pakistan has faced challenges before, from Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in the 60s and 70s, from Nawaz Sharif much nearer. In that context, how serious is the challenge Imran Khan poses today?
Karan, it's always good to be with you. I'm delighted to be here. Pakistan today seems to be caught in a kind of a time warp. We are back almost to the 1990s when you had successive governments being turfed out in a kind of a musical chairs that your earlier guest, General Durrani, had talked about. The situation hasn't changed dramatically. And the reason for that is that the political parties are still weak and divided, and they tend to either try and make alliances with the military or to use opposition to the military to gain popular support. But the military is the most organized political institution in the country. It also has coercive power, and that it uses whenever the need arises. Currently, I don't think that possibility is very real, but things could change.
I'll come to how the army will respond in a moment's time. But first, compared to the challenges the army's faced in the past, how serious is the one Imran Khan poses today?
You know, I covered the rise of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I used to work for Pakistan Television in those days, and I thought that he posed the strongest challenge to the military, particularly to the military dictator Ayub Khan. And he had a national following. Imran Khan is coming close to that, but not at that level, in my view. He doesn't have the widespread support that he needs throughout the country that would garner support for him or catapult him into power. The military is extremely well prepared. They are able to tackle whatever challenges are thrown at them. And they have now found the frontman from the coalition that is currently the government of Pakistan, which is essentially the prime minister acting as a frontman for his elder brother, the former prime minister who is sitting in London, and who is actually calling all the shots. The Pakistan People's Party seems to have decided to take a back seat. So I think Imran Khan is important as a very powerful disruptive force, but as to whether he can take on and defeat the military politically is doubtful.
Now, when Imran Khan first became prime minister in 2018, he was widely perceived as the army's chosen man. Most people in your country, Pakistan, felt that without the army's support, he would not have won. Today, on the other hand, he publicly disparages the army and calls them neutrals. He's even recently threatened to reveal things that would embarrass the army. How did this relationship go so terribly wrong?
Well, Karan, as you know from the famous play by George Bernard Shaw called Misalliance, when you have a marriage between unequal partners, it won't last. And so this is a very typical definition of a misalliance when you have a marriage between the civil and the military in Pakistan. On the one hand, you have an extremely organized force. It is politically aware. It has people all over the country. It is disciplined. And then you have the disruptive force, which is often the populist leader like Imran Khan. But he is commanding a very fractured political party. People who have been in other political parties and have either been removed or couldn't find their way and have found it advantageous to be part of his entourage. So he is really the party and the party alone. And he has appealed to the youth, he has appealed to the urban middle class, but it's not clear that he has the power off the street to back him. Just to go back to the elections, I did a little reporting and spoke to people on both sides of the issue of the election. And I can confirm that there were selected seats in the Punjab, particularly, where officers of the ISI offered choices to candidates who had safe seats to either run as independents or not run at all, or to join Imran Khan. And many of them did. And if you recall, there was a group of 40 from South Punjab that ran as independents and then joined his government.
Absolutely. This is what I was alluding to when I said that many people believe without the army support, Imran wouldn't have won. But the important point you're making is that this is a misalliance, and the relationship between Imran and the army, which looked so close in 2018, was inevitably destined to fall apart. Now, in an interview that Imran Khan gave Dawn on the 10th, that is just 5 days ago, he said the first sign of trouble with the army emerged when the army was reluctant to help his government convict people who were guilty of corruption. He said the turning point, which is when the relationship broke, is when the army chief, that's General Bajwa, wanted Imran Khan to appoint Aleem Khan as Chief Minister of Punjab, and Imran refused to do so because of alleged cases of corruption against Aleem Khan. Do you believe that that is the real moment when the relationship broke, or do you believe that in fact the break happened later, in around the end of last year, when there were differences between the army chief and Imran over the appointment of the new DG ISI, which was of course a far more critical issue from the army's point of view? Which of this was the breaking point?
I don't think there was a single breaking point. It was a cumulative effect of differences of management style or lack thereof. The army, as you know, is extremely well organized and disciplined and prepares for all its meetings. Imran Khan is not. And so this was always going to be an issue. He relies on personal relationships. The military relies on institutional relationships. If you recall, there was an earlier difference when he asked for the DG ISI, who is currently the senior most officer for the next few days at least in the running for the army chief's position this year, Asim Munir. He asked for him to be removed. And he asked for him to be removed because this officer, who is a straight arrow, went to the prime minister and informed him about the alleged corruption involving his family, his household, and their friends and so on. And Imran Khan said to the army chief, he's interfering in my personal life. Would you please remove him? And so he was removed only after 8 months. So the differences had started at that point. The other problem that was evident to the current army chief was that there was almost a complete lack of governance, particularly in the economic side, where decisions were being made and then unmade. And Imran Khan was very Trumpian in his decision making. He was whimsical and he would change his mind. And so blaming it all on the army, particularly when he is the prime minister, and saying that the National Accountability Bureau reports to the army and not to me, is a convenient excuse in my view. I think if that's the issue, you confront the issue with the military chief and you resolve it. Of course, the final breaking point occurred with the delay in his acceptance of the nominee for the DGISI, when he said that he needed to interview all the candidates. In the end, he ended up with the choice of General Bajwa. So that really didn't establish his credentials.
Now, Shuja Nawaz, today, Imran Khan has taken to threatening the ISI, more importantly, threatening the army and perhaps General Bajwa in particular. He says he can reveal things that would embarrass them, but for the sake of the country, he's chosen not to do so. But that is a clear, blatant threat. It's not just a taunt, it's a threat. It's not something the army is used to hearing from civilian politicians. So how have these threats gone down with the army?
Not well, I'm pretty sure. And it will certainly spoil the situation for him with the new army chief. So we're entering into very dangerous territory when former prime ministers start revealing state secrets and try and embarrass the military, which is one of the more popular institutions in the country. Then you're going to be faced with consequences which could prompt somebody with a shorter fuse than General Bajwa into taking some other kind of action, which cannot be ruled out in Pakistan. At one point I used to refer to the situation in Egypt as the creation of Pakistan on the Nile. These days, I'm often referring to the creation of an Egypt on the Indus.
And the allusion there, when you talk about the army being forced to take some other sort of action, even though you didn't use those words, is probably some form of army intervention or takeover. And clearly, when you say that Pakistan looks like Egypt on the Indus, you're alluding to the fact that the person who runs Egypt is the former army chief, former defense minister, Field Marshal al-Sisi. I'll come to that in a moment's time, because that is something I very much want to go into, the possibility of an army intervention. But for a moment, let me continue with Imran Khan. On the 7th of November, Imran Khan wrote to the president of Pakistan, who is, of course, a former member of his PTI party. And as president, he's also supreme commander of the armed forces. And Imran Khan demanded an inquiry into how the DGISI held a public press conference and suggested that the DGISI had breached the Official Secrets Act. Imran Khan also called for an inquiry into the Director General Inter-Services Public Relations for holding a press conference where he targeted what Imran called is the leader of the largest party, which is, of course, Imran Khan himself. What are the chances that the president will agree to such an inquiry? And secondly, if he does, how will the army respond to an inquiry instituted against the DGISI, against the DG Public Services Relations?
I think this is political rhetoric at best. President Alvi is an extremely balanced individual. He is increasingly showing himself to be more of a president than being a representative of the PTI. So this is highly unlikely. However, I think my own understanding is that the current DGISI who participated in this press conference would not have taken this decision on his own. He's a thorough military professional. This is not his want. he has in fact issued instructions to the media not to take his pictures or videos at meetings where others are present. And so he wasn't seeking the limelight. I would guess that he was instructed by the Army Chief General Bajwa to go out and clarify the points that he wanted clarified from the military's vantage.
But then you're also suggesting that this is not just political rhetoric by Imran Khan, but also a sign of his desperation, because he's appealing to a president who's now behaving constitutionally rather than as a former member of Imran's party, which is what Imran, I presume, hopes he will continue to behave as.
Absolutely. And it's very Trumpian, and it may not be beyond the realm of possibility that he seeks an explanation as a party member from Dr. Alvi, saying, why are you doing things the way you're doing them? You're supposed to be a member of our party.
Now, there are reports that whilst the generals are themselves distancing from Imran Khan, and many perhaps don't even want to see him back in power, the middle ranks of the army, it's widely reported, are more supportive of Imran, even if that is silent support. A, are these reports accurate? And B, if they are, does it suggest that Imran Khan has succeeded in dividing the army?
Well, we have to first recognize the changing shape of the Pakistan army. Today, Pakistan has an army which is, I would say, truly representative of the population of the country. It is primarily recruited from the cities and the peri-urban areas. This includes not just officers, but also the JCOs and other ranks, the Javans. And so anything that affects the cities and the peri-urban areas, and of course the countryside, will affect those people. And there is nothing to stop them from sympathizing with one leader or the other. And Imran Khan, to give him credit, has certainly captured their imagination. So yes, there is support for him. However, the military continues to show discipline and order. And I think it is keeping tabs internally on any groups that would be disruptive. The biggest issue that has arisen in the last few months has been the vocal support for Imran Khan from some retiree organizations. This is unusual in Pakistani politics. And so a number of organizations have sprung up, including people based overseas, who want to give very critical statements against the military and against the army chief in particular.
And is that a matter of concern to the army chief in the army? And has the army taken steps to, how shall I put it, silence these people?
I'm sure it's both. And in one particular case, the person was taken in for questioning and then advised to return back to England. So yes, they have the means and the ability to do that. The army, as you know, and this is where the Inter-Services Public Relations Directorate comes in, now has enormous resources and technical capacity and links with the media through contracts and subcontracts and so on, that they can influence what is said and what is not said.
So in other words, talk of differences, leave aside divisions within the army over support for Imran Khan is a bit exaggerated. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
What about the mood on the streets of Pakistan? How do, and I'm talking in particular about young Pakistanis, view the army? And do you accept that today's young Pakistanis are both more outspoken and more critical of the army than the youth of earlier generations? Is that an important change that's happened in, say, 2022 compared to the 80s and 90s or even the early 2000s?
Well, Karan, I must admit, I have not been on the streets of Pakistan for the last 3 years. My last visit ended rather abruptly, as you know, when the army chief essentially wanted me to leave and come back later for the launch of my new book, because he didn't want any controversial discussions to affect the chances of his extension. The matter was then before the Supreme Court. So I can't speak personally from my experience of what people are saying on the street. However, my communication with people across the country indicates that the youth are not all for Imran Khan, although he does excite the youth. The youth are also potentially leaning towards right-wing religious parties. And there are two reasons for that. One is that most of the recruitment, particularly for the army, now is coming from the inner cities of Pakistan. The traditional northern districts of the Punjab have kind of ceded their hold to central and southern Punjab. And the data that I had indicated that in the decade ending 2003, more officers were recruited from Karachi than from my home district of Jhelum, which used to be the sword arm of the Punjab. So there are those changes that have to be taken into account, and the religious parties have a strong foothold in the cities, in the inner cities. Moreover, as job opportunities disappear and the economic crisis becomes worse, the recruitment by right-wing groups, militant groups particularly, of these youth becomes much more easier.
So what you're saying is that the claim, and it's often made in the press, that the young in Pakistan are tilting towards Imran and are more critical of the army, again, is an exaggeration.
I would think so, because not all the youth in Pakistan think alike. This is a very independent new generation, and most of them, are under the age of 22 or 23, which is the median age of Pakistan. So most of them were not even around at the time that some of the critical issues that the older politicians keep bringing up. Most of them are not around at the time of the last Indo-Pakistan war. And the second factor which affects them is what happens in India. As India becomes much more right-wing, it kind of provokes the religious and the militant groups in Pakistan to point across the border and say there's a threat there and we need to counter it, so come join us. So I think there's that also as a factor.
Now, let's look down the road a little. Sometime in the next 10 days, but possibly sooner, Imran Khan's long march is scheduled to reach Islamabad. Will the army permit that to happen? Or do you think, as General Durrani was saying to me, and I know you've seen that interview, the army will step in with preventive or maybe preemptive action?
I think the decision is that of the government. The army has the capacity to stop anything within the country. But the civilian government also has the police, and it can bring in the rangers who technically report to the Minister of Interior. So they have the wherewithal to stop anything, particularly seal off the entry points. And there are some indications that Imran Khan now appears to be targeting Rawalpindi and not Islamabad as his terminal point for the long march. So we'll see how that develops. But I think much more interesting will be what occurs in the next week when, by all accounts, there should be a decision on the new army chief.
I'll come to that again in a moment's time. But since you say a lot depends upon what the civilian government, that's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's government, wants, let's look at that issue for a moment. If the march reaches either Islamabad or Rawalpindi, and for the sake of the Indian audience, I'll point out Rawalpindi is the headquarters of the army. It's roughly 13 miles from Islamabad. Islamabad is where the civilian government has its capital. If the march reaches either Islamabad or Rawalpindi and there's violence at the rally, then if he tries to go one step further and convert that rally into a long dharna, as he did in 2014, and the Sharif government calls upon the army in either of those two situations, either because there's violence or because he's converting it into a long dharna, and the Sharif government calls upon the army to control the situation, how will the army respond?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't have the answer for that because depending on the timing, it'll be the last week or 10 days of General Bajwa's term. And particularly if a new army chief has been appointed, which is why I keep coming to that, there will be some division of thought processes in GHQ. So it'll be interesting to see whether they want to go in with guns blazing to clear a dharna of one of the more popular parties in the country.
Absolutely, because in that sort of situation, the army could end up facing a terrible dilemma. Will it be prepared at the request of the Sharif government to fire on its own people and thus control the situation which may be slipping out of hand? Or will it say to Mr. Sharif, sorry, we're not prepared to fire on our own people. You must now negotiate with Imran, concede elections, and then the army runs the risk of Imran winning and coming back. And those two choices are the horns of a terrible dilemma that will face the army chief. And that, if it happens in the next days, will still be General Bajwa. Won't that be a terrible dilemma for him?
It will. But, I'm not in the prediction business. I deal with scenarios. And one of the scenarios may well be that the military presents options for an election schedule that allows things to cool down.
In other words, you're saying the army will lean on Shehbaz Sharif to say, we are not prepared to shoot. Don't look upon us to control the situation if you can't do it. Instead, you have to hold negotiations and agree to early elections. But the problem if the army does that is that those elections, as things stand today, will inevitably lead, it seems, to Imran coming back to power. Does the army want to see him back in office?
I think that's a very heroic assumption on your part, or anyone's part, given the population of Pakistan and given the current political configuration of Pakistan. So it's not guaranteed that Imran Khan would win a majority as he did the last time around, because he may not get the support from the ISI or the military intelligence or from other official agencies. That is still a reality on the political landscape in Pakistan.
Well, this is very interesting because most pundits, whether in Pakistan or outside, seem to have formed the opinion that Imran has amassed sufficient popular support to be able to win an election, particularly if it's one that's called early, on his own, and this time round he won't need ISI and army support. You're disagreeing there.
Yes. And pundits are never always correct. I'm sitting in just outside Washington, D.C., and we've had an election here which everyone assumed was going to be a disaster for Joe Biden and his party, and it didn't happen. And now they're all scratching their heads. I saw a program on Indian television of real pundits who were looking at the stars and predicting a World Cup win for India in the T20. So pundits can be wrong too.
Let's then come, and I've deliberately left it to the end, to the question of the new army chief. As you know, General Bajwa's term is ending. I believe he retires on the 29th, which means that the new chief will step into office on the 30th. That's exactly in 15 days from today. Now, in normal circumstances, the choice of an army chief in Pakistan is a pretty critical decision. But in present circumstances, how much more important and crucial has it become?
Well, it's always critical because it determines the relationship between the military and the civil for the next 3 years. And unfortunately, if the past is any indication, may well indicate the relationship for the next 6 years. Because if you recall, it was the civilian government and the opposition combined that agreed to a new approach, which would allow the extension of an army chief for a second term and then even beyond. So I think this is a failure of political governance in Pakistan. The
Can I ask you this? Is there a possibility General Bajwa could get a second extension? If I've been informed correctly, he's still below the age of 64, and technically, I've been told he could get yet another extension when his term ends on the 29th. Do you think that's at all feasible? I know he's publicly denied he wants one. He's done that in Washington, he's done it in Pakistan. But generals, when offered an extension, particularly in circumstances that prevail today, could change their mind. So, what do you think is the answer to that?
It's a very, very remote possibility. I think he's done his farewell rounds. He's in the middle of saying goodbye to some of the distant formations. And there are any number of excellent officers in the senior ranks of the Pakistan Army that could succeed him, that would be denied an opportunity as they were denied before when he took his first extension and when General Kiani took his first extension.
In which case, do you have any sense of who is likely to be the new army chief? I know you mentioned earlier in this interview that General Munir, who is the senior most general, retires in the next few days and possibly before the 29th when General Bajwa has to step aside. So do you have any sense of who will be the new army chief?
Well, we know the names. So let's just quickly, for an Indian audience, explain what's happening. Asif Munir, who is not a Pakistan Military Academy commissioned officer, but an OTS officer, is the senior most. And then you have a bunch of officers, all of whom are from the same 75th Pakistan Military Academy long course. They all were commissioned at the same time, and their seniority is established largely by their ranking at that time, which is a rather antique and quaint way of looking at this. The other thing that affects their seniority is the day that they put on their third star. So people get into all kinds of fine points about who's senior to whom. Having looked at their profiles, Sire Shamshad Mirza and Azhar Abbas appear to be the leaders in this particular group. General Mirza used to be commander of 10 Corps, which is headquartered in Rawalpindi, looks after the LOC, among other things. And Azhar Abbas used to be the chief of general staff. Used to be, the head of 10 Corps, is now the chief of general staff. Interestingly, he's also extremely well-versed in terms of India. He's considered an expert on India. And so both of them are highly trained, well-equipped officers. And then you have Nauman Mahmood, who is less well-known because he has retained a very quiet approach to everything, hasn't campaigned ostensibly for the job, is now the president of the National Defense University. Equally qualified. The only negative, and this is a very personal comment on my part, is that the Prime Minister needs to be careful at what filters he's using to select the next army chief. In my humble opinion, and this is just a humble opinion, and free advice is worth what you pay for it, Prime Minister, anyone who has any association with the ISI should not be considered because it creates a very different mindset from those in the regular army. And so if you want the army to be professional and militarily oriented, then it's best not to bring somebody who has dealt in the dark arts, which is the ISI's forte. So his only issue is that at one point he was DG analysis at the ISI, but within the ISI, that is the more thoughtful, and it's a kind of a official diplomatic relationship with other agencies.
You're talking about General Mahmood at this moment, aren't you?
Yes. And then you have Faiz Hamid, who was controversial. And so the Prime Minister will want to avoid that controversy, of course, and he was DG ISI. And he broke with his own mentor, General Bajwa, on a number of issues, including reportedly on going off to Kabul in a very public way, which created problems for Bajwa with his US counterparts. And then you have General Amir, who is an artilleryman, extremely well qualified, highly respected. So there's a great choice. And in my view, if the Prime Minister can't make up his mind, perhaps he could just resort to a blindfold and darts and see where the dart lands on which picture on the wall. It would work.
Let me put it like this. You've named 5 people, Generals Mirza, Abbas, Mahmood, Hamid, and Amir. You raised question marks, if that's the right way of phrasing it, about Generals Mahmood and Hamid. That leaves 3 in the running, Mirza, Abbas, and Hamid. If you were Prime Minister, who would you pick?
I don't know. I would need to speak with them and understand their thinking and their background much more than I do now. I really can't say. What I'm saying is that they're all prepared. They're all extremely well qualified. They're all well trained. And any one of them would be an excellent chief of army staff. Now, there is another factor, and the Prime Minister needs to set that aside. There is only one Shia in this group. And I'm saying this because in Pakistan, this is an issue that is raised sort of below the surface. This was an issue that was raised when the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs was being named, because he was Shia and it was considered dangerous or whatever. I think Pakistan needs to get over that sectarian constraint. And so Azhar Abbas may well be one of the more qualified of these officers, but he's the only Shia in the group. And I hope that that will not stand in his way in being considered.
My last question, Shuja Nawaz, and this is one that I ask particularly with an Indian audience in mind. In its 75-year history, Pakistan has seen several army takeovers. Although in recent years, the army, it's widely believed, has committed itself to only playing a constitutional role and to perhaps giving advice behind closed doors and behind the scenes, is there a danger that in the present circumstances, the situation could so develop, particularly, I suppose, in the next 15 days, that there is an army takeover, even if it's initially announced as one of limited duration to put the country back on the rails, to hold elections and restore part of the civilians. After all, those were the terms on which General Zia-ul-Haq took over in 77, but his 3 months very quickly stretched to 11 years. Is there a similar sort of danger on the horizon, or is that an exaggerated way of seeing things?
I think it's a slight exaggeration. The Pakistan army is much more sophisticated in the way it interacts with the civilian authorities and the politicians. Now, they have learned to use the politicians as frontmen. They also have a much stronger presence in the economy. And so one of the critical factors in all of this is going to be the state of the economy. If the economy tanks and you have much more unemployment than you currently do, you have negative growth, and you have disruption of food supplies and supply chains within Pakistani society, then yes, it is possible that some kind of an interim setup, again, possibly using, and this is a scenario, using a technocratic setup to operate for a particular period, which would be pre-announced, and which the judiciary would have to sign off on, may be an option. And this is really where a new chief is less burdened with making such a decision, because he has not yet been fully invested in the current arrangements, as General Bajwa has been for 6 years now.
Just to clarify, the possibility, you say it's a remote one, is that the army might choose an interim arrangement with a technocratic front, that is to say, technical specialists who know how to handle the economy, like the gentleman in the mid-1990s who was brought from the World Bank to be interim prime minister for 3 months. Unfortunately, I forget his name. That is the sort of remote possibility that could happen, but not with present existing civilian politicians.
Yes, and the gentleman you're talking about is one of my mentors and highly respected Moin Qureshi, who was at the IMF and then went to the World Bank and became a senior vice president there. He was highly respected by the military under General Abdul Wahid, who succeeded my brother, as you know, in 1993. And he also was responsible for some very deep economic changes, including legislation to make the State Bank of Pakistan a much more independent entity. So yes, that is a possibility. And I don't want to put ideas into the heads of the generals that are being considered. But that is one possibility. And the US and the West and the Chinese and the Arabs will all perhaps understand the need for a stable economic Pakistan rather than an unstable Pakistan with nuclear weapons.
You're tempting me to ask one last question. Is there a second Moin Qureshi you can identify?
I would not bring anyone from outside, frankly. I think there are enough good people inside Pakistan to be able to run it and run it well. I'm delighted when I meet young CEOs. I'm delighted when I meet young scholars inside the country and interact with them. I think there's enough brain power in the country to be able to take care of itself. I think that the days of imported governments should really be over.
Shuja Nawaz, for this fascinating insight into the thinking of the army, for your understanding of the hopefuls who are there to be considered as the next army chief, and the remote possibility, as you put it, of the army briefly intervening with a technocratic front. I thank you deeply. These are eye-opening for an Indian audience and something that would help all of us in this country better understand yours. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.